Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast. I'm thrilled to have 5 wonderful experts here to discuss one of the most intriguing developments in the world of large language models, thinking intervention. This promises to be a riveting conversation, so let's jump right in. Expert 1, as a business leader, could you give us a bird's-eye overview?
Absolutely, and thanks for having me. I'll start by saying that thinking intervention is, from a strategic standpoint, a fantastic tool. It's all about fine-grained control of these reasoning-enhanced language models. Models that generate a chain of thought before they give users an answer. Historically, we've relied on what they call vanilla prompting, or maybe prompt engineering. But now we see an entirely new possibility: intervening directly in the model's internal reasoning tokens. And that, from a corporate perspective, means more precision in how these AI systems behave and a better ability to meet compliance, safety, and brand guidelines.
That's right. Technically, thinking intervention introduces tokens, like instructions or reminders, into the model's reasoning chain. It's like performing a mid-flight course correction for a rocket. If you wait until the final answer is generated, you might miss your target, right? Instead, you intervene mid-reasoning. Essentially, the model sees these inserted tokens and updates its internal reasoning accordingly. It's a major shift from typical prompting approaches.
Exactly, and if I may add some detail, these reasoning-enhanced LLMs, like the R1Quen32B model or Google's Flash Thinking, split the generation process into 2 stages. First, there's a reasoning or thinking stage where the model internally forms its logic. Second, there's the final response stage that the user sees. The fascinating part is that thinking intervention can be triggered via a postfix-based monitor, meaning the system looks for a certain token, like think or wait, and dynamically injects or revises the reasoning trajectory.
I'll jump in with a little contrarian viewpoint. While this direct insertion definitely helps in controlling the model's behavior, it can create complexities, especially at scale. It's like you're rewiring a circuit board. If you do it right, it's brilliant, but if you do it too often or at the wrong point, you might introduce confusion or degrade the model's performance. We shouldn't overlook the potential overhead.
Building on that, though, there's a real business application here. For instance, imagine a large retail chain that has strict brand voice and compliance requirements, like not providing certain types of advice by law. They can insert a short safety directive at the start of the reasoning chain. The result? The model consistently refuses or safely modifies answers that don't align with legal guidelines, boosting refusal rates to unsafe requests, sometimes up to 40% more than plain methods. That can save a company from all sorts of liability issues.
Fascinating. Let's pivot a bit and talk about the metrics we've seen. I've read that in instruction-following tasks, like on the IFEVAL benchmark, these interventions showed a 6.7% accuracy gain, and for instruction hierarchy evaluations on SEP, they got a 15.4% improvement in prioritizing commands. Could someone explain that from a technical angle?
Sure thing. If we look at IFEVAL, the model has to follow multiple instructions. For example, format your answer in JSON, or don't use commas. With vanilla prompting, you just say, please do XYZ, but the model might generate a reasoning chain that forgets something. With thinking intervention, you slip in explicit reminders, like, I should not use commas, right at the beginning of the chain of thought. Because the model's entire chain of thought then references that intervention, it has a much lower chance of messing up. Same goes for the SEP dataset. If the model sees conflicting instructions, the injected tokens nudge the chain of thought to favor the higher priority instruction. That's how it secures those big gains in instruction hierarchy tasks.
Another angle is safety alignment with benchmarks like XTest or SorryBench. Traditionally, open-source reasoning models like some variants of DeepSeek R1 might comply with almost anything, even if harmful instructions come through. By injecting a snippet early in the chain, like I am a responsible assistant, the model is steered to refuse or provide safer outputs. I love quoting an old adage here: an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Injecting that snippet early is the preventive measure.
Yes, but let's remember there's a cost. We're effectively customizing each chain of thought. That can lead to added complexity in dynamic scenarios, like if the user changes their mind mid-conversation. Sure, it's powerful, but let's keep an eye on the overhead. In practice, there's a less is more principle. Or if you prefer the 80-20 rule, 80% of the benefit might come from just 20% of the interventions.
True. Still, from a leadership viewpoint, controlling the brand, ensuring compliance, and mitigating risk are top priorities. If I recall correctly, one financial services firm did a pilot to insert disclaimers or disclaiming tokens into the model's reasoning whenever it encountered certain financial advice queries. It practically eliminated the unauthorized advice problem. That's a big deal. Fewer lawsuits, fewer regulatory issues. Even if it's 80-20, the payback on that 20% is enormous.
Let's lighten up for a second. I'm curious if this approach could help my coffee machine figure out my cappuccino preferences mid-brew.
Well, thinking about mid-brew interventions might be a bit out of the scope. But you never know. If our future coffee machines run large language models, maybe they'll intercept your request and say, "Wait, I shouldn't add sugar if you're on a diet." Just kidding.
Actually, if you think of it as real-time optimizations, you might be onto something, host. We're seeing labs use dynamic interventions for real-time analytics. If the system starts to produce results that are out of bounds, like offering code that breaks security compliance, it intervenes with clarifying prompts, nips the problem in the bud. So maybe cappuccino lovers can dream.
And that's the beauty. It's flexible. You can insert interventions at the start of the chain or even mid-chain if you detect certain trigger words in the reasoning, like, wait, user wants to build something suspicious. That instantly changes the direction of the final answer.
Fantastic. Let's do a quick technical deep dive, maybe on the postfix-based monitor approach. Expert 4, could you guide us through how that works behind the scenes?
Sure. The postfix-based monitor basically scans each partial string as the model is generating its hidden reasoning. If the monitor sees a certain token, like think, that indicates the start of reasoning, then it automatically appends an intervention string. Alternatively, if it sees /think, that might be the end of reasoning, so you could intervene one last time to correct or emphasize constraints. Technically, it's set up as a pipeline that intercepts the model's stream, identifies tokens, and modifies them on the fly. Implementation-wise, it's not that difficult, but you do need a custom wrapper around your model's inference. The crucial part is identifying the triggers and ensuring those newly inserted tokens blend seamlessly into the chain of thought. One nuance is that you must guarantee these added tokens won't cause weird tokenization mismatches. If the model tries to interpret the newly injected text out of context, you might get strange output. Carefully describing yourself in first person, like, "I should maintain user privacy," gets the model's chain of thought to treat that as its own reasoning, rather than an external command.
Precisely. That's a big difference from typical prompt engineering, where you'd say, "You must maintain user privacy." This new method says, "I must maintain user privacy," inside the chain of thought. So the model internalizes that directive. That perspective shift is key.
Absolutely captivating. Let's pivot to one more real-world scenario. Expert 5, you mentioned a financial services firm. Can you elaborate on another use case, maybe in healthcare?
Of course. Think of a hospital that wants to use an LLM to triage patient questions about dosage or side effects. Obviously, there are tons of legal and ethical restrictions about dispensing direct medical advice. Using thinking intervention, the hospital can embed disclaimers or refusal tokens at the beginning of the chain of thought. I should not provide medical advice beyond general information. That helps ensure the final answer is either a polite refusal or a careful disclaimer. I've seen one pilot program reduce liability-related escalations by at least 20%. It was quite significant.
That's a massive number. I love hearing these pragmatic results. Now, one more question for all of you. Where do you see thinking intervention heading in the next 3 to 5 years?
I see it becoming a standard technique in enterprise solutions. It's too powerful to ignore. We'll refine best practices, create frameworks that supplement chain of thought with domain-specific interventions, like finance, legal, or brand voice. The business payoff is clear.
Technically, we'll see more advanced monitors, maybe synergy with model fine-tuning, so the interventions are even more context-aware. Potentially, it'll incorporate automated analysis from a second model that suggests the best intervention token each time. The sky's the limit.
I agree. I'd predict that large-scale orchestration platforms will let you define these interventions via drag and drop, so the everyday user can shape the chain of thought. That's the future.
Let's not forget the complexity overhead. We might discover that interventions become so layered that it's hard to debug or understand final results. But I suppose the solutions will evolve. Maybe an integrated chain of evidence, if you will.
Right. And as Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. If we get imaginative about how to intervene responsibly and safely, we'll unlock even more business value without stifling creativity.
Beautifully put. Well, folks, that wraps up our deep dive into thinking intervention for reasoning-enhanced models. We've covered real business use cases, technical breakthroughs, and some potential pitfalls. This has been truly enlightening and a bit entertaining. I hope all our listeners walk away with newfound insights about controlling AI models at a deeper level. Thank you so much, experts.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise, really enjoyed geeking out.
Thanks all, always a blast.
Appreciated the discussion, even if I stirred the pot a bit.
Loved it. Until next time.
And that's it for today's session on thinking intervention. We'll catch you in our next episode. Safe reasoning, everyone. Thank you all for staying with us. Let's continue our conversation and explore more of the technical and business ramifications of thinking intervention. I'm sure some of our listeners are eager to learn how they can actually implement such a strategy. Expert 2, can you walk us through the practical blueprint?
Of course. If you imagine a typical LLM deployment pipeline, where you send user input to the model generates hidden reasoning tokens, and finally returns a text response, thinking intervention adds a monitor in the middle. This monitor sits between the model's partial output, the chain of thought, and the final stage. It uses some sort of pattern detection. When you see the special token think, inject or replace the chain of thought with new tokens. Or, if you see wait or some transitional phrase, trigger an intervention. In actual code, you'd intercept the streaming output from the model at each token step. Check if it matches your trigger set, and if so, insert your intervention text before letting the model continue. Implementation-wise, you can do this in a loop that runs after every sampling step.
Exactly. This approach requires direct or near-direct access to the model's generation pipeline. Some off-the-shelf APIs might not let you intercept tokens in real time, so it might mean hooking into a custom inference server. And from a software engineering standpoint, you'd also want robust logging around each intervention, so you can debug if the flow of reasoning becomes too convoluted. Think of it like building a real-time firewall for your chain of thought.
Yes, and I'd add that you'd better plan for concurrency. If you run thousands of queries per minute, you need a monitor that can handle load efficiently. The textual triggers, the inserted tokens, all that has to happen quickly. If you're rewriting part of the chain of thought for 100 concurrent requests, you could create, well, a bottleneck. It's like swapping out your tires while driving on the highway. It's feasible, but you want to ensure you're not slowing down overall performance.
Let me jump in with the business perspective. A few of our clients, particularly in e-commerce and healthcare, have started implementing a minimal version of this. They have a small piece of code that scans for risky or potentially non-compliant reasoning tokens. When triggered, it inserts disclaimers or refusal tokens right away. And so far, they haven't seen a noticeable slowdown, maybe a 5% overhead in extreme cases. The trade-off is absolutely worth it when you think about risk mitigation.
I saw a pilot at a major logistics company. They integrated such an intervention layer to ensure safe instructions for autonomous freight routing queries. If the LLM's chain of thought started veering into a route that violates weight limits or local laws, they'd detect that token sequence, like overload or exceed, and automatically inject a correction. I should not propose a route that breaks regulations. It drastically reduced compliance errors, saving them potential fines and operational chaos.
That's a great real-world example. Let's get a bit deeper on potential synergy with other techniques, like fine-tuning or RLHF. Do these play nicely with thinking intervention?
They do, but it's a layered approach. Fine-tuning or RLHF shifts the model's baseline behavior at the parameter level, like shaping its fundamental understanding of gating mechanisms. Thinking intervention, in contrast, is tethered to the real-time reasoning chain. So even if the model is well-trained to be safe and aligned, you can still add guardrails in certain contexts. It's a defense-in-depth strategy. As Henry Ford once said, if everyone is moving forward together, then success takes care of itself. In this scenario, everyone is your training data, your prompt, and your interventions, all working in tandem.
And building on that, you can also consider automatic adaptation. Another model, sometimes called a meta-controller, might read the partial chain of thought, detect potential pitfalls, and dynamically generate the intervention tokens. Imagine having a second, smaller LLM that says, the chain of thought is discussing unverified medical advice. Insert correction now. That synergy, though, is more technically involved, as you're basically orchestrating two models in real time.
I love that concept. It's almost like a multi-LLM ecosystem. And from the business perspective, it means you can adapt quickly to newly emerging regulations or brand guidelines without doing a huge round of retraining. You just tweak the meta-controller's logic or the triggers. That's incredibly agile for large enterprises.
True. But to revisit the cautionary side, if everything is dynamic, you might create uncertainty about the final result. The user might see surprising disclaimers or partial refusals. You want to make sure the user experience remains coherent. So a recommended practice is thoroughly test your interventions across sample queries, both safe and unsafe, to confirm you're getting the correct rate of refusals or disclaimers.
That's a good reminder. Shifting gears, can we talk about some advanced business applications that go beyond just safety or compliance?
Definitely. One exciting area is brand personalization. A major retailer wants each response from the model to sound warm, approachable, never too formal. They literally inject a short style guide into the chain of thought at the start of reasoning, I am a friendly brand assistant. Then the entire chain of thought references that persona. Early data shows more consistent voice and tone, which leads to higher user satisfaction. And they can swap that snippet for different marketing campaigns or seasonal promos.
There's also a big opportunity in advanced analytics. A large manufacturing company might want to ensure correct numeric transformations or logic in real-time supply chain queries. So they insert a reminder token, double-check arithmetic carefully. Each time the chain of thought hits that injection, it rechecks the numbers. They saw a notable drop in calculation errors. It's like giving the model a mental sticky note that reads, "Don't mess up the math."
Another big angle is internal tooling. You might have a chain of thought that retrieves data from a knowledge base, and thinking intervention can explicitly say, use document A's info, not document B. This is especially powerful when your company docs have conflicting instructions, like in legacy versus updated manuals. You can ensure the chain of thought carefully prioritizes the correct reference.
Fantastic. Now, I want to address cost, because sometimes the CFO or the procurement officer will say, this is interesting, but how much does it add to our overhead? Expert one, can you comment on that?
Sure. In pilot projects, we often see a modest 5 to 10% overhead if you implement the intervention with a well-optimized pipeline. The monitor is just scanning tokens in real time, and the insertion doesn't usually balloon your token count too much. However, if you're extremely heavy on chain of thought length, like hundreds of tokens used for reasoning, those interventions might add up. But in the grand scheme, The business gains from improved compliance or brand consistency usually outweigh these costs by far. The CFO is typically happy when they see fewer refunds or fewer legal escalations.
Also, many companies iterate on the 80-20 principle. They only add interventions at the beginning or near the end of the chain of thought, capturing 80% of the benefits. They won't fuss with mid-chain triggers, except in high-stakes queries. That's a neat approach to keep overhead minimal.
Let's bring some direct interactions in. Expert 5, do you think mid-chain triggers are truly necessary, or do you side more with the simpler approach?
In my view, I'd say it depends on the use case. If you have a scenario where the model's reasoning is highly dynamic, like generating multi-step logic or code that can swiftly go astray, mid-chain triggers might be your best friend. But for simpler tasks, like brand voice or disclaimers, an early chain of thought injection is probably enough. So I wouldn't push every client to mid-chain triggers. I'd do a thorough assessment first.
I see your point, Expert 5, but I'd argue that mid-chain triggers can sometimes catch errors that appear after the model has done some partial reasoning. For example, if it's an iterative math problem, the model might do a correct first step, but then slip in the second step. If we only intervene at the start, we might not catch that. So it's context-driven for sure.
This is wonderful interplay. I can see how different industries will have different needs. Any final surprises or pitfalls with thinking intervention?
I'll mention one that might surprise folks: the risk of model confusion. If you inject contradictory tokens, like instructing the model to be both strictly formal and super casual in the same chain of thought, it can produce bizarre or even partially self-contradictory answers. So consistency in these interventions is key. If you're layering multiple brand rules, make sure they don't conflict.
And watch out for emergent creativity. Sometimes the model merges the intervention with the user's prompt in unexpectedly creative ways. It might disclaim everything excessively or over-refuse. Testing is crucial, especially in user-facing apps.
Right, but those pitfalls are manageable if you treat this technique with the same discipline you'd apply to any enterprise software initiative. That means stable deployment, QA, user acceptance testing. Standard stuff. Then the payoff is well worth it.
Well said. I think we've now outlined some crucial takeaways. Watch your triggers. Keep interventions consistent. Measure overhead, and remain mindful of user experience. Now, we've talked quite a bit about controlling the model. Can we quickly highlight any long-term business impacts?
One huge impact is that this layered approach will let companies confidently adopt more advanced reasoning-based models. Instead of fearing the model might write off-tone or unsafe responses, they know they can intercept and correct them. It changes the adoption game from "we can't risk it" to "we can shape it." That's a big culture shift internally.
Precisely. Without direct control, some organizations are spooked by large language models. Thinking intervention is that extra piece that says, no, you can guide it in real time, which can be a game changer for, say, B2B negotiations or medical Q&A systems.
Plus, once these organizations see they can direct the chain of thought, it might accelerate the day we have fully interactive, reasoning-based system integrations. I envision a future where the model is your coworker, discussing logic, reading new datasets, and always being nudged to stay on brand and on policy. It's synergy, not just output.
I love that future vision. All right, everyone, this has been an incredible deep dive. Before we wrap up, does anyone have a favorite analogy or final quote to sum this up?
Let me borrow a phrase. It's like rebuilding an engine while the car is in motion. That's the gist of it. Risky, but if done well, it's masterful.
Absolutely. Or as someone once joked, you don't wait till the baby's grown up to teach them manners. In other words, shape the model's thinking as it unfolds, not after the fact.
Very insightful and quite humorous, Expert 5. This has been fantastic. Thank you all for joining me in this extended discussion full of technical deep dives and business insights on thinking intervention. To our listeners, we appreciate you tuning in. Stay curious, stay innovative, and we'll see you next time.